This is Update One, the podcast of the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. Update One provides a forum for listeners to learn about national and international stories, focusing on journalism and communication issues, news, and politics. Now, the latest edition of Update One.
I'm Adam Cano, and joining me today is Jen Judson. She is the 115th president of the National Press Club and a reporter at Defense News here in the Washington, D.C. area. Jen, thanks for joining me on Update One.
Thanks for having me.
Before we talk about your goals as president this year, let's begin with the club itself. What is the state of our current operations, and what do you see in the near term?
All right. So the club has made a lot of progress during the pandemic. Our membership is intact, which is remarkable. In part, that's because our mission has been sustained through programming and press freedom work. The business has made steady progress. As you know, we made an operating profit and grew revenues every year from 2007 to until 2020 when the pandemic hit. And we've made steep losses in these years, as you may not be surprised to hear. But we covered the gaps with loans and reserves and government programs. And this last little patch of Omicron was a setback as we were making nice progress in the fall. And the board and leadership has taken, a long view and worked together on this. And, the club has important assets like its brand, its staff, the clubhouse, financial resources. So nothing about this has been easy, but we will make it through. In the near term, we are expecting a loss this year, but we're expecting business to pick up in the spring, barring any new variant similar to Omicron, and in the fall as well, and we should be able to project a profit for 2023. And we are already paying off our debt using operations, so lots of progress there. Nice.
We're sitting here in the Broadcast Operations Center on the fourth floor of the National Press Building, and not a lot of folks know that there is a fully equipped studio facility here. And I gather it's been one of the bright lights among otherwise more challenging ones throughout the pandemic, as at least the broadcast side of the enterprise has continued to generate revenue.
That's correct. The Broadcast Operations Center has really come alive. We've been able to conduct many virtual events over the last several years. Here, it's kind of the heartbeat now of the club. If you're here on any given day, this is where a lot of the activity actually is, since we are still broadcasting to many people working from home or working outside of the club.
On day one of your presidency, you prioritized the release of Austin Tice and asked President Biden to do the same. Can you kind of remind our listeners who Austin is and what his particular plight is?
Yes, I'd be happy to. I'd love to talk about him every chance I get. Austin was reporting on the conflict in Syria when he was arrested on August 14th, 2012. Since then, he's been detained in secret and in silence, and he is a Polk Award winner. He was covering the country's civil war as a freelancer for McClatchy in the Washington Post and CBS News. And at the time, there were very few journalists reporting in Syria because of the danger involved. Austin is actually a former Marine captain. He has training and skills that helped him work in the difficult conditions in Syria. But unfortunately, he was detained, and he has been there ever since. As you can probably do the math, that means about a decade now we're coming up on. I became a member in 2012, so he's been in Syria as long as I've been involved in the club, and that's pretty alarming. Some recent happenings that related to this. On January 18th, we had Senators Cornyn, Leahy, Menendez, and Risch sent a letter to President Biden encouraging the administration to continue pushing for Austin's safe release. And we're continuing to help work on his release and to continue to bring attention to his case. And I'd like to ask listeners to please go to change.org and sign the petition calling on Biden administration to prioritize his release. We have over 150,000 signatures last I checked in January. So let's keep them coming.
Well, I know that can make a difference, and it's certainly not the first time the club has gotten involved in trying to free a captured journalist. The club, as I'm sure you remember, was deeply involved in pushing for the release of Jason Rezaian, and even at one point, I believe over a 24-hour period, we read stories, coverage by Jason over YouTube to just continue to highlight his plight, and he was released after 500 and something days. So there is hope for Austin Tice, and we certainly hope that comes to a similarly happy conclusion. Are there other journalists who are going through either detention or challenges that you want to talk about while we're on the press freedom topic?
Absolutely. I can mention a few. So Hayes Fan is a Chinese journalist who was working for Bloomberg when she was taken in 2020. She's not been charged, and she's still being held. We thought all the attention of the Olympics might lead to a break in her case, but nothing so far is happening there. We're working on the case of Emilio Gutierrez Soto as well. He is under threat of deportation back to Mexico, and we hope he is granted asylum this year. That's the goal, and hopefully we're getting there very soon. And I have met with some very brave Afghan journalists very recently who arrived in the U.S. Following the fall of Kabul, and we are working with them to see how we can help. The journalists actually are still trying to maintain contact with other journalists in the country who are in hiding, but still trying to do their reporting.
Yeah, so amazing stories, but also some sensitivity around there.
Yes, I can't mention names or the news organization.
So looking more broadly at the press freedom topic, since it's something that's very foundational to the club, any priorities with regard to this year and your term and press freedom beyond obviously helping these individuals?
Yes, I mean, obviously those are really big priorities that I've already listed, but we have a great press freedom team at the club, now led by Rachel Oswald. The team is working to monitor cases, policies, worrying trends around the globe. For instance, we're seeing a rash of murders of Mexican journalists this year. There have been at least 4 journalists murdered in Mexico so far since the beginning of the year, and we've put out several statements calling on the Mexican government to investigate the murders with expediency and to bring the murderers to justice. Sometimes statements feel a little bit like you're shouting into the wind, but hopefully we have a loud enough voice to be heard in some way. We'll likely have several events this year that shed light on different press freedom issues, so more to come on those in the future months. But promoting press freedom is a major goal of mine, so I've asked all of the teams at the club to look through that lens in everything that we do to emphasize those issues and to continue to promote awareness.
I should mention that the new Press Freedom Committee leader follows in the footsteps of John Donnelly, who held that position for many years.
18 years, I think.
Yeah, came on this podcast a number of times, and obviously we will welcome the new leader on as well because it is such an important topic.
And John is still very much involved as a leader emeritus and continues to help as an advisor for all of us.
Yeah, no, his efforts were absolutely tireless and remarkable for sure for anybody.
We wouldn't let him step away entirely.
No. We need him, and more importantly, journalists everywhere need John Donnelly and those like him. Media literacy is another topic of interest, I know, for you in an era of misinformation and disinformation. So what can the press club and its members do on its own, but also perhaps in conjunction with others?
Yeah, and I think in conjunction with others is so important. I'm looking at how the NPC can be involved front and center in this conversation around media literacy and improving the relationship between the media and the public as well. But I know that this is such a big thing that we really can't do this alone. We really need every journalistic organization to contribute to the conversation and to the education of in terms of media literacy. So I think it was Margaret Sullivan had a column in the Washington Post at the beginning of the year that just said journalists need to engage now. It's crucial in an effort to save our democracy to really start addressing these issues. To work on misinformation, to work on the relationship between the media and the public, Obviously, that's frayed to a very scary level. But this could well be the year that shapes the future of our country's system of government. And we have, less than 10 months and change to make a difference as journalists as we head into the midterm elections. So that's not a lot of time, and it's a really big challenge. And so therefore the NPC can't do this alone, but it's going to be a priority. And I'd really like to tackle that across all of our teams. I'm having our teams take a look at how we can maybe bring in fact checkers to talk about their process, and live streaming this out to the public, I think, is a really great way to do that. We're lucky that in this day and age in the pandemic, we've really honed in on how to do things virtually, and that also means that we can reach more of the public than if we were doing things like we used to. Depending on people to come in and listen to our speakers in person. Now we can really educate the public and stream, fact checkers discussing their process or things to watch out for when you're looking at misinformation. How to check to see if something is a reliable news source, for instance. So those are things that we can reach out directly to the public with.
And you talk about the challenge domestically between January 6th, which wasn't that long ago, just over a year ago, the midterm elections coming up later this year. But media literacy is not just a domestic challenge. It's also fed by propaganda, some of it coming from our near-peer adversaries, particularly Russia and China. So, what can be done for what is really a global threat?
Wow, that's a big undertaking. But you're right that this is a problem.
Easy question,
in many
hard
places.
answer. Yeah.
I'm a defense reporter. I personally have seen it happen while reporting in Eastern Europe, for instance. Back in 2017, I saw fake reports from the Russians talking about soldier activity that didn't happen, U.S. soldier activity that didn't happen in certain villages and towns and countries where there were U.S. exercises happening, for instance. So I've seen it up close and personal. But misinformation has been at the heart of shaking up public sentiment and creating chaos, and the Russians are using it right this very second. And so this is an issue, as you say, near-peer adversaries with China, with Russia. They use propaganda as a weapon. So I think it's just our job as the world's leading organization of journalists to continue to highlight what they are doing, point out what's not correct. And I think that also involves partnering with news outlets to fact-check misinformation globally, to list what's incorrect somewhere where people can turn to and double-check what they're reading. That's a big undertaking, not something we can do alone. But I've asked many of our teams to work on programs that could continue to help shine a light on how to diffuse misinformation as a weapon, and we can be a loud voice in this mission to counter the threat. And that is definitely another priority of mine.
Yeah, because it really seems like media literacy within the context of a free society, right, is very much under threat, and the challenge comes from, from everywhere, but also what can we do, not just to speak to those folks who are members and who are naturally empathetic and sympathetic to our cause, but really to speak more broadly, like you said, in conjunction with others, at a time when trust in the media, trust in government, is so amazingly low. My employer, Edelman, for the sake of disclosure, and others have done, measurements of trust, and unfortunately, trust in these traditional institutions of government and media remain at a very, very low point at a time when arguably that clarity and truth is needed more than ever.
Yes, and I think also it's our role as the world's leading organization for journalists is to continue to train our members to write rock solid stories. We have to work at the speed of light sometimes. We compete with other journalists, a deep pool of journalists to break stories. And making sure that you're getting the facts right in your stories, that's our responsibility. And something that, I hope that we can, maybe through a professional development team, provide some courses and guidance for our members to continue to learn how to make sure that their reporting is rock solid when they're working as fast as they have to work. We can make a lot of mistakes, and the public will definitely hold us accountable, and they have.
Absolutely, as well they should. You are the 115th NPC president. Most of them historically have come from what we would broadly term the mainstream media, wire services, newspapers, magazines, broadcast media even. But you come from a trade media background. You, as you say, report on defense. So how do you think that informs your perspective as president of the club, and perhaps how you might prioritize things for this coming year?
I mean, that's a good question, but I just like to think of it as a beat. I cover defense, national security, policy, business with specific focus. Does it make my perspective different as president? I don't think so. I'm still a classically trained journalist. I have a master's degree in it. I cut my teeth in community news as a generalist, so I've covered everything from a state house to selectmen's meetings. And I think I've learned to be a leader in my beat, and that's led me to become a leader at the club. Since I am covering such a niche, I can be a leader in my beat. And I also work really closely with other reporters in my newsroom. That we're very accustomed to that. We don't really operate as lone wolves in our newsroom. That's the reputation that we have among the defense trades for sharing bylines, and that's really only increased. And so, I like to think, I can't do my job alone. I rely on so many smart and motivated and creative people with other backgrounds that can make, my stories richer in the newsroom, but could also make my leadership at the president richer experience for everyone in the membership. So I like to, I think one of the things that I do well is that I organize people to all come together to accomplish things. I don't try to do it all by myself. And so I look forward to seeing what the Press Club membership does in terms of bringing creative ideas to get after some of my goals this year. And I'm sure that they will do it, and I'll be very proud to see what they can accomplish.
And speaking of membership, almost half of that membership are communicator members.
Yes.
And so as you think about them and what the club has that can benefit them professionally, socially, hopefully as we emerge out of this pandemic without any further major variants, what do you hope they might get out of the coming year?
I think that one of the things that all of the members really enjoyed prior to the pandemic was just being able to network, really get in front of each other, exchange business cards. So that's going to be, I think, something that I'd like to see return. Our, communicators, reporters, targeted communicator reporters events where, sometimes we used to do this where we would have a specific beat, like national security, or let's say you cover the Hill, or healthcare, and, be able to bring people back together again. There's no way that communicators can do their job effectively with journalists without developing relationships with the journalists that they need and what they're specifically targeting. So, yay! I think we're going to be able to bring people back together in person. So I certainly see that. I've also I'm reviving the freelancers team and the professional development team this year. I'm securing good leadership for those teams. I won't say names yet for a couple because I'm still waiting for their final yes. But I think we're going to see that revived. I think professional development is so important to our membership. I knew I needed to make it a priority to bring that team back. It hasn't been active for several years now. So that is going to be something where we will see a lot of activity for communicators and for journalists in terms of events that will help them develop. And then not related to just communicators, but to all of us as members, there's so many events that I'd love to see come back, but the spelling bee is something I really want to see come back. I know that that's an event that everyone has looked forward to. I've personally planned it several years in a row. But Scripps is on board if we can make it happen. So let's all keep our fingers crossed that the pandemic lets us do it this year. I think it'll be a really, really great event to do.
And the latest on your inauguration?
Yes, my inauguration is now May 6th, and I will be sworn in by the Army Secretary, the first female Army Secretary, Christine Wormuth. So it'll be a very fun night. I'm really looking forward to it.
Super. And maybe one last thing that some folks who listen to this may not be aware of, the club has student memberships for the next generation of journalists. My daughter happens to be a student member of the club, and
Great.
so an opportunity there for them to get involved in activities through the teams and committees as well.
Yes. And that's something that we need to work on is ensuring that when our student members become members, that they know where to go, who are the contacts that they can reach out to join teams. I think we do need to work on just making sure they're aware of what's out there at the club, especially in the pandemic. It's harder you can't just walk in and ask what's happening. You have to figure it out in other ways. You have to get Zoom links to participate these days. So that's on us and our membership team to make sure that our students are welcomed and that they know how they can get involved.
Jen, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Jen Judson is the 115th president of the National Press Club. You can follow her coverage on Twitter at Jen Judson, also at NPC President. I'm Adam Cano. Thanks again for listening.
Update 1 is a production of the National Press Club's Broadcast Podcast Committee. You can comment on this podcast or any episode of Update 1 by sending an email to update1podcast, that's update the number 1 podcast @gmail.com. Thanks for listening to Update 1.